Have you ever wondered why some people carry the world on their shoulders? Why certain souls seem to feel everything with an intensity that hurts, think with a depth that isolates? It's like waking up every day with the weight of 1,000 untold stories on your shoulders, each one whispering truths that the world doesn't want to hear. If you've made it this far, maybe you're one of those people. There's a special kind of suffering that doesn't appear in psychology textbooks. It's the weight of a mind that can't see life simply, that transforms every experience into a symbol, every encounter into an existential reflection. It's the silent pain of those who feel too much in a world that prefers the surface, as if carrying a heart without skin in a universe made of thorns. This isn't a video about pathology. It's a recognition, an embrace for those who carry sensitivity like a second skin, who make thinking both refuge and prison. There's a mind that isn't satisfied with shallow explanations. For it, a rose isn't just a flower. It's a symbol of love that blooms and withers, of beauty that hurts, of time that doesn't return. A casual conversation transforms into deep analysis about human nature. A strange look on the street becomes questioning about belonging and social acceptance. This hyper-symbolic mind lives in constant translation of reality. Every experience needs to be decoded, understood, integrated into a personal worldview that never stops being constructed. It's as if life were a text in a foreign language that needs to be interpreted line by line, word by word. But it's not just over-interpreting. It's feeling that every gesture in the world carries a secret message destined specifically for you, as if the universe were a book written in personal code. What should be liberating, the ability to see beyond appearances, often becomes a prison. When everything has meaning, nothing can be lived lightly. When every gesture carries symbolic weight, spontaneity is lost. The deep thinker finds himself trapped in a web of interpretations he himself created, unable to simply be without questioning what it means to be. This relentless search for meaning is born from an authentic thirst for understanding, but can transform into compulsion. The mind that can't stop analyzing is also the one that has difficulty acting. Paralysis by analysis becomes the price of excessive lucidity. The thinker finds himself observing life instead of living it, interpreting instead of experiencing. It's a delicate dance between the blessing and curse of expanded consciousness. The same capacity that allows seeing hidden beauty in things is the one that prevents mental rest. The mind that creates meaning is also the one that gets lost in its own symbolic labyrinths. In a world shaped by speed and superficiality, being authentic has become an almost heroic act of resistance. The deep thinker looks around and sees people running after goals that seem empty, celebrating achievements that sound hollow, faking happiness on social media while carrying inner emptiness. This perception generates a specific type of loneliness. It's not just being physically alone, but feeling disconnected from a world that seems to operate on a different frequency. It's like being a radio tuned to a station that no one else can pick up. Authenticity becomes both identity and isolation. The price of inner truth is high. At dinners, you measure your words like someone stepping on glass, fearing that intensity will scare other guests. While others navigate social life with apparent ease, the deep thinker questions every interaction. Why pretend interest in empty conversations? Why smile when you don't feel genuine joy? Why participate in social rituals that seem devoid of meaning? This constant tension between being true to yourself and adapting to social expectations generates a peculiar emotional wear. It's like constantly translating yourself into a language that isn't yours, simplifying an inner complexity that asks to be expressed in its totality. Authenticity stops being a choice and becomes a psychic necessity. The deep thinker literally gets sick when forcing himself to be superficial for too long. His body, his soul, his mind protest against the betrayal of his own nature. The social mask weighs more than it should for souls that were born for transparency. But there's also a silent dignity in this refusal of falseness. In a world that encourages constant performance, staying true to one's own depth is an act of courage. It's choosing the difficulty of authenticity instead of the ease of conformity. When consciousness expands beyond what's necessary for daily life, a trap forms. The deep thinker develops a hyper-lucidity that paradoxically paralyzes him. It's like having a mirror in the brain, reflecting every intention before even acting, showing all the variables of a situation, anticipating all possible consequences. analyzing all angles, and getting lost in the impossibility of perfect choice. This excessive consciousness works like a spotlight that illuminates too much. Where others see a simple decision, the hyperconscious sees a complex web of implications. Where others act on instinct, he questions every impulse. Where others trust intuition, he demands complete rational understanding. The result is a refined paralysis, disguised as prudence. The deep thinker convinces himself that he needs to understand everything before acting, but everything is infinite. He gets lost in analyses that unfold into other analyses, in questions that generate new questions, in doubts that multiply like fractals. This hyperconsciousness becomes particularly cruel when directed inward. Self-knowledge, which should be liberating, becomes an instrument of self-torture. The deep thinker knows himself too well, sees his patterns with excessive clarity, anticipates his own reactions in a way that eliminates life's surprise. Knowing yourself deeply should bring peace, but for some minds it brings only more material for self-questioning. Why do I react this way? What does this say about me? How can I change this? Inner life transforms into a constant laboratory of self-observation, where spontaneity dies under the weight of analysis. It's like having an internal critic that never sleeps, an observer that monitors every thought, every emotion, every reaction. Hyperconsciousness steals the innocence of direct experience, filtering everything through layers of interpretation that distance the person from their own life. There's a cruel irony in the fate of those who think too much. The search for clarity generates confusion. The thirst for understanding produces paralysis. The desire for control results in a feeling of powerlessness. The mind that should be an ally becomes an implacable questioner of its own decisions. There's a fear that's rarely named, but that inhabits the heart of many deep thinkers. The terror of being too much for others. It's the silent fear that their intensity scares, that their depth pushes away, that their sensitivity is seen as weakness or eccentricity. This fear is born from real experiences. The deep thinker learned, often still as a child, that his natural way of being bothered others. His questions were too complicated, his emotions too intense, his reflections too heavy. Gradually, he internalized the message that there was something wrong with his way of existing in the world. Alfred Adler observed how feelings of inferiority can form not from real deficiencies, but from differences that are interpreted as inadequacies. The deep thinker develops a specific complex. He doesn't feel inferior for being less capable, but for being different in a way that seems socially undesirable. Unconsciously but systematically, he develops containment strategies, uses humor to disguise depth, chooses silence when he wants to speak, flees from situations where his intensity could emerge. It's as if he had learned to behave like a lion pretending to be a house cat, contracting muscles that should expand, muffling roars that should echo. This sensation manifests in constant self-repression. He learns to measure his words, to hide his intensity, to fake interest in subjects he considers banal. He develops a painful ability to minimize himself to fit into spaces that weren't made for his emotional and intellectual amplitude. The result is a divided personality. There's the authentic self, deep and intense, that exists mainly in solitude. And there's the social self, controlled and adapted, that interacts with the world. This division generates a specific tiredness, as if the person lived constantly playing a role that isn't theirs. Even more painful is when this fear is confirmed. When relationships end because you're too intense, when friendships fray because you complicate everything, when opportunities are lost because you think too much. Each confirmation of the fear reinforces the belief that there's something fundamentally inadequate about being who you are. The deep thinker finds himself facing an impossible dilemma: be authentic and risk rejection, or adapt and lose himself in the process. It's a choice that shouldn't exist, but that imposes itself daily on those who carry a nature that challenges standards of social normalcy. For some minds, thinking becomes more than intellectual activity. It becomes an emotional survival strategy. When external life has been marked by experiences that hurt deeply, the inner world of ideas offers a safe refuge where pain can be processed, organized, understood. This relationship between thought and trauma is subtle, but powerful. The child who grew up in an emotionally unstable environment learns that understanding family dynamics helps her navigate unpredictability. The teenager who suffered abandonment develops theories about relationships as a way to protect himself from future disappointments. The adult who carries childhood wounds uses analysis as a shield against vulnerabilities that still hurt. But this process, trauma-generating hyperinterpretation, generating mental exhaustion, creates a self-perpetuating cycle where the very healing tool becomes a source of depletion. Excessive thinking becomes an attempt to control the uncontrollable. If I can't predict others' actions, I can at least understand their motivations. If I can't prevent them from hurting me, I can at least understand why they did it. If I can't change the past, I can at least make sense of what happened. This defensive function of intellect isn't pathological in itself. It's an intelligent adaptation of a psyche seeking to process difficult experiences. The problem arises when mental refuge becomes prison, when analysis replaces experience, when understanding becomes compulsion. Often the deep thinker has difficulty leaving his head and inhabiting his body, leaving the world of ideas and entering the world of sensations. Trauma taught that feeling can be dangerous, that emotional vulnerability brings risk. Thinking offers the illusion of control that the emotional world doesn't provide. Recognizing this dynamic is the first step toward a healthier relationship with one's own depth. Understanding that excessive thinking can be both a healing tool and an avoidance mechanism allows for a more conscious approach to one's own inner life. There are souls that carry a melancholy that has no cure, and perhaps shouldn't have one. It's a sadness that isn't born from specific circumstances, but seems to be part of the very structure of being. It's the melancholy of the thinker who sees life's brevity, the fragility of beautiful things, the inevitability of loss. This sadness isn't depression in the clinical sense. It's more an emotional tone, a way of being in the world that recognizes its tragic dimension without despair, that accepts pain as an integral part of human experience. It's the melancholy of those who feel deeply the impermanence of everything they love. The deep thinker often is born with this sharpened sensitivity to existence's tragic dimension. From early on, he perceives that people die, that time passes, that nothing remains forever. This early awareness of transience marks his way of seeing the world with a sobriety that others only develop with age. There's a specific beauty in this melancholy. It makes the person more sensitive to the preciousness of moments, more attentive to details that others ignore, more capable of appreciating beauty that exists precisely because it's fragile. It's as if awareness of finitude intensified the capacity to love. And yet, between one tear and another, there's a strange pleasure in perceiving yourself alive enough to feel so much, a silent dignity in carrying the world's pain like someone carrying an honor. But this same sensitivity brings a constant weight. The melancholic thinker carries the world's pain in an almost physical way. He suffers with injustices he didn't directly experience, feels the anguish of past and future generations, identifies with all human suffering as if it were his own. This isn't a sadness that needs to be cured, but understood and integrated. The deep thinker's melancholy is part of his particular form of loving the world. A love that includes pain, that embraces complexity, that doesn't deny existence's shadowy dimension. It's a sacred sadness that connects the person with something greater than their individuality. Accepting this melancholy as part of oneself, instead of fighting against it, can be profoundly liberating. It's recognizing that some sensitivities are gifts disguised as burdens, that certain forms of suffering are also forms of understanding. We live in an era that has lost its spiritual and symbolic roots. The traditions that once offered meaning and direction have been questioned, deconstructed, abandoned. The result is a society that's technically advanced but spiritually orphaned, materially prosperous but symbolically poor. The deep thinker feels this emptiness particularly acutely. His need for meaning can't be satisfied only with material achievements or superficial pleasures. He needs something that transcends the immediate, that connects his individual existence to something greater, more lasting, more significant. This search for meaning in a culture that has lost its founding myths generates a specific type of existential suffering. It's like being hungry for a food that isn't available, thirsty for water that has dried up. The deep thinker finds himself navigating a world that offers many distractions but few genuine meanings. It's the emptiness that Charlie Chaplin captured in modern times. The mechanization of human life, where people become gears in a machine that has lost the sense of its own functioning. The absence of ritual, of sacred, of tradition, leaves the person adrift in an ocean of possibilities without direction. Everything is permitted, but nothing is especially significant. All choices are valid, but none seem essential. This excessive freedom becomes a form of prison for those who need symbolic structures to organize experience. The spiritual emptiness of the era manifests in symptoms that psychology is still learning to recognize. A diffuse anguish that has no specific object, a sensation of unreality that isn't psychotic, a loneliness that isn't resolved with company. It's the suffering of a soul that doesn't find where to anchor its sense of purpose. For the deep thinker, this cultural context makes life particularly challenging. His natural sensitivity to existential questions leaves him more vulnerable to the emptiness of an era that replaced the sacred with the utilitarian, the symbolic with the literal, the eternal with the ephemeral. The search for meaning becomes, then, an individual and solitary journey. Each person needs to construct their own worldview, their own rituals, their own significant symbols. It's a Herculean task for a sensitivity that should be nourished by a culture rich in collective meanings. There's a specific risk that threatens the deep thinker, living excessively in the world of ideas and losing contact with bodily and sensory reality. When the mind becomes the main territory of existence, the body is relegated to second place, treated as a mere vehicle for intellect. This dissociation between mind and body isn't intentional. It happens gradually, as the person discovers that in the world of ideas, he finds more pleasure, more control, more meaning than in the physical world. Thought offers infinite possibilities, while the body seems limited, vulnerable, unpredictable. The problem is that this escape to the mental has real physical consequences. The body, neglected, begins to manifest symptoms. Anxiety that expresses itself as muscle tension. Repressed emotions that become digestive problems. Mental stress that transforms into chronic insomnia. Breathing that becomes short and shallow. Shoulders that carry an invisible but palpable weight. Jaw that contracts even during sleep. What the mind tries to avoid, the body ends up expressing in a language of pain that can't be ignored. The hypertrophy of the mental self creates an imbalance that affects the entire experience of being alive. The person feels disconnected from their own sensations, strange in their own skin, as if they inhabited the body provisionally. Physical reality loses density, vigor, presence. This bodily disconnection also affects the ability to be present in relationships. It's difficult to create genuine intimacy when living primarily in your head. The other is perceived more as a concept than as a physical presence, more as an idea than as a body that breathes, pulses, feels. Reconnecting with the body doesn't mean abandoning mental life, but creating a bridge between the two worlds. It's learning that intelligence doesn't inhabit only the brain, but the entire organism. It's discovering that the body has its own wisdom, that sensations carry information that thought alone can't access. This mind-body integration is essential for the deep thinker's psychic health. Without it, his depth becomes sterile, his sensitivity becomes pathological hypersensitivity, his intelligence disconnects from the life it should enrich. There's a type of suffering that's born not from one's own pain, but from others' pain felt as if it were one's own. The deep thinker, especially one who possesses high empathic sensitivity, often develops a capacity to feel others' emotions so intensely that he loses the distinction between what's his and what belongs to others. This hyperempathy isn't a conscious choice. It's a neurological characteristic that makes certain people automatically absorb the emotional states around them. It's like having thinner emotional skin, more permeable, less capable of filtering external influences. For the empath, entering a room means automatically reading the emotional climate present. Talking with someone who's sad results in carrying part of that sadness. Being close to anxious people generates personal anxiety. It's as if the boundaries of the self were more porous than they should be. This characteristic, which can be seen as a gift of human understanding, often becomes a burden. The empath finds himself constantly drained by others' problems, unable to separate his own emotional needs from others' needs. His sensitivity, which should be a source of connection, becomes a source of exhaustion. In practice, this translates into chronic difficulty saying no, taking on responsibilities that aren't his, carrying guilt that belongs to others, as if he were emotionally responsible for everyone's well-being around him. The trauma of empathy arises when the person perceives that his compassionate nature is exploited or misunderstood. Relationships become unbalanced, with the empath always giving more than he receives. His capacity to understand is confused with an obligation to solve others' problems. Learning to protect oneself energetically without losing the capacity to love is one of the most delicate tasks for the empathic thinker. It's developing healthy boundaries that allow genuine connection without destructive invasion. It's discovering that loving doesn't mean carrying the entire world's pain on your shoulders. Empathy, when balanced, is one of the most beautiful forces of human nature. But when uncontrolled, it can become a form of self-sacrifice that benefits neither oneself nor others. The deep thinker lives in a different time than the rest of the world. While society accelerates, he needs to decelerate. While others run after productivity, he requires pauses to process. While culture values speed, his nature asks for contemplative slowness. It's as if, while others run like subway tracks, following defined routes at constant speed, you walked like someone crossing a Japanese garden, each step deliberate, each pause necessary, each element observed in its unique details. This temporal mismatch isn't laziness or inadaptation. It's a real psychic necessity. The mind that processes information in multiple layers needs more time to digest experiences. The heart that feels intensely requires space to integrate emotions. The soul that seeks meaning demands pauses for reflection. Living in this decelerated inner time in a world that rewards speed generates constant tension. The deep thinker always feels late, always out of rhythm, always pressured to accelerate processes that naturally demand time. It's like forcing a flower to bloom before its season. This temporal difference affects all areas of life. At work, while others make quick decisions, he needs to ponder. In relationships, while others connect superficially with ease, he requires time to create genuine intimacy. In social life, while others navigate multiple commitments, he needs intervals to recompose himself. Modern society doesn't offer space for this type of rhythm. Everything is urgent, immediate, instantaneous. Contemplation is seen as waste of time, pause as unproductivity, slowness as inefficiency. The deep thinker finds himself constantly swimming against the current of a world that doesn't understand his need for time. Accepting and honoring your internal rhythm, even when this means being out of sync with external expectations, is an act of fundamental self-respect. It's recognizing that quality of process is often more valuable than quantity of results, that depth is worth more than speed. The challenge is finding ways to exist in an accelerated world without betraying one's own contemplative nature. It's creating spaces of slowness in a life that pressures for haste, honoring the need for pause in a culture that values constant action. Some people are born carrying questions that are too big for their age. Since childhood, they question not just the how of things, but the existential why. Why are we here? Why do people die? Why does suffering exist? What's the meaning of all this? They're children who, at 6 years old, ask their mother, if God made everything, who made God? Or, why are some people born sad and others happy? Questions that leave adults without answers and reveal a soul that was already born, questioning the foundations of existence. This precocious philosophical soul often disconcerts the adults around them. Parents and teachers find themselves facing a child who asks questions for which they have no answers, who demonstrates an emotional and intellectual maturity that contrasts with their physical age. It's as if an ancient soul inhabited a young body. Premature philosophical awakening brings unique benefits and challenges. On one hand, it offers an understanding of life that goes beyond the surface, a capacity to see patterns and meanings that others only develop with experience. On the other hand, it can generate a feeling of isolation and difference that marks the entire life trajectory. The philosophically awakened child often feels displaced among their peers. While other children play carefreely, she carries existential questions that make her feel different, older, heavier. It's as if she carried a burden of consciousness that shouldn't exist at such a tender age. This early awakening to existence's great questions can profoundly affect mental health throughout life. The person may develop a tendency toward melancholy, excessive sensitivity to the world's suffering, difficulty finding joy in life's simple things. But there's also a special dignity in this condition. The philosophical soul, even when young, possesses a unique capacity to understand human complexity, to offer deep insights, to see beyond appearances. It's as if it carried a wisdom that transcends personal experience. The challenge is integrating this philosophical nature so that it enriches life instead of overloading it. It's learning to ask the big questions without getting lost in them, to seek answers without despairing with mysteries that remain unsolvable. One of the most silent sufferings of the deep thinker is the shame he feels about his own nature. After years receiving messages that his intensity is excessive, his sensitivity is weakness, his depth is complication, he internalizes a fierce criticism against himself. This shame isn't born from nothing. It's the result of a forced social adaptation process, where the person learns that to be accepted he needs to hide essential parts of who he is. The child who asks too complicated questions learns to be silent. The teenager who feels too intensely learns to repress himself. The adult who thinks too deeply learns to diminish himself. The result is a personality divided between the authentic self, which exists mainly in secret, and the adapted self, which interacts with the world in a controlled and reduced way. This division generates a specific tiredness, as if the person lived constantly playing a role that isn't theirs. The shame of being deep manifests in constant self-criticism. I'm complicating too much, I'm too sensitive, I think too much about everything. Even worse are the more subtle questionings that corrode self-esteem. Am I being too dramatic? Maybe I force this depth to feel special. What if my intensity is just disguised neediness? It's as if the person had an internal tribunal that constantly judges her for not being able to be simpler, lighter, more normal, creating layers of doubt about the legitimacy of her own emotional experience. This self-repression has serious psychic consequences. The energy that should be used for creation and expression is diverted to control and containment. Spontaneity dies under the weight of self-censorship. Authenticity is sacrificed in the name of social acceptance that, ironically, never materializes completely. Healing this shame involves a process of reconnection with the intrinsic value of one's own nature. It's understanding that depth isn't a defect, but a characteristic. That sensitivity isn't weakness, but strength. That intensity isn't a problem, but a particular way of being alive. The path to this healing passes through finding spaces and people who value depth instead of fearing it. It's discovering that there are others who share this way of being. The difference can be celebrated instead of hidden. The deep thinker lives a constant conflict between two apparently contradictory needs: the need to be authentic and the need to belong. This tension, which Carl Jung identified as central in the individuation process, intensifies for those who carry a nature that challenges conventional social patterns. On one side is the impulse toward authenticity, the inner force that demands genuine expression, that refuses falseness, that seeks to live according to one's own deep nature. On the other side is the desire for belonging, the basic human need to be accepted, loved, included in a community. For most people, this tension is manageable. Small adjustments in personality allow maintaining essential authenticity while adapting to social expectations. But for the deep thinker, the distance between his authentic nature and social expectations can be an abyss that seems unbridgeable. Individuation, in the Jungian sense, is the process of becoming who you really are, regardless of external pressures. For the deep thinker, this means accepting and expressing his contemplative nature, his sharpened sensitivity, his need for meaning, even when this puts him in conflict with environmental expectations. It's like sculpting a statue of yourself from a rough block of stone. A slow, delicate process that requires removing everything that isn't essential to reveal the form that was always there, waiting to emerge. But complete individuation doesn't mean social isolation. The challenge is finding ways to be authentic that also allow genuine connection with others. It's discovering that there's a difference between superficially adapting to please and finding points of real connection with people who value depth. This process requires courage to disappoint expectations that were never yours, to lose relationships that depended on you being someone you're not, to face the possibility of temporary loneliness in the name of more authentic connection in the future. The true resolution of this tension happens when the person realizes that their individuation doesn't distance them from humanity, but connects them with it more deeply. When they stop trying to fit into spaces too small and begin creating spaces that accommodate their amplitude. For the deep thinker, Dreams aren't just random neurological discharges. They're the language of the unconscious, symbolic messages that offer insights about internal conflicts, growth directions, non-integrated aspects of personality. This natural sensitivity to the symbolic world makes dream life particularly rich and significant. Jung dedicated a great part of his work to studying dreams as a way to access the personal and collective unconscious. For minds that naturally think in symbols and metaphors, dreams offer a territory where rational logic can rest and deeper wisdom can manifest. The sensitive thinker often develops an intimate relationship with his dreams. He learns to remember them, to record them, to dialogue with their images and symbols. He discovers that there he finds answers to questions that conscious mind can't resolve, directions that will can't determine. Active imagination, a technique developed by Jung, allows conscious conversation with unconscious contents. For the deep thinker, this can be a powerful tool for self-knowledge and healing. It's like creating a bridge between the rational world and the symbolic world, allowing both to inform life in an integrated way. The images that emerge from dreams and active imagination often carry an emotional charge that words can't express. For those who live intensely in the world of ideas, these symbolic experiences offer a way to process emotions that intellect alone can't digest. This capacity to work with symbols isn't just a therapeutic tool, but a way to enrich daily life. The thinker who learns to read symbolic language discovers layers of meaning in the most ordinary experiences, finds guidance in apparent synchronicities, develops a richer and more multidimensional relationship with reality. Remember those questions we asked at the beginning. Why do some people carry the world on their shoulders? Maybe because they learn to read the messages the world sends, to decipher symbols that others can't see. Symbolic life offers the deep thinker a territory where his contemplative nature isn't just accepted, but is essential. It's a space where depth is a resource, not a burden. When emotions are too intense to be expressed in words, when thoughts are too complex to be communicated directly, creativity offers an alternative language. For the deep thinker, the creative process often becomes not just a form of expression, but a means of emotional survival. Creation allows internal contents to find external form without losing their complexity. A painting can express a melancholy that has no name. Music can communicate a joy that overflows words. A poem can give voice to contradictions that prose can't accommodate. This creative process isn't just cathartic, but transformative. By giving external form to internal contents, the person relates to them differently. What was once just suffering can become material for beauty. What was once just confusion can organize itself into artwork. For the deep thinker, creating is often the only way not to drown in his own intensity. It's as if creativity functioned as an escape valve for internal pressures that would otherwise become unbearable. What can't be lived directly can be transformed into art. The anxiety that corrodes from within finds relief when it becomes music. The loneliness that weighs like lead softens when it transforms into poetry. The insomnia that tortures early mornings quiets when it finds form in painting or writing. This saving function of creativity doesn't diminish its aesthetic value. On the contrary, often the emotional urgency that drives creation results in works of particular authenticity and power. It's as if the psychic necessity to express gave special density to what's created. The creative process also offers the deep thinker a way to communicate his complex nature to the world. Through art, he can share his particular vision of reality without having to simplify it or explain it. The work speaks for itself, creating a bridge between internal and external worlds. Discovering one's means of creative expression can be one of the most liberating experiences for those who carry a deep nature. It's finding a language that accommodates their complexity, a territory where their difference is an advantage, not an obstacle. For the deep thinker, loving and being loved presents unique challenges. His need for authentic connection, his emotional intensity, his tendency to seek meaning in everything can both enrich relationships and complicate them. The central question becomes, how to connect intimately with another without losing one's own essence. Love, for those who feel deeply, is never simple. It's experienced with an intensity that can frighten partners accustomed to more superficial dynamics. The deep thinker loves with the same amplitude with which he thinks and feels, which can be simultaneously the greatest gift and the greatest challenge he offers to a relationship. This loving intensity is often misunderstood. It can be seen as dependence when it's actually capacity for surrender. It can be interpreted as drama when it's actually emotional authenticity. It can be feared as excess when it's actually a particular way of loving. The challenge is finding someone who not only tolerates this intensity, but values it. Superficial relationships leave the deep thinker emotionally hungry, as if he were eating only appetizers when he needs a complete meal. He requires connections that honor his complexity instead of asking him to simplify it. More than that, he needs someone who understands that his silences aren't coldness, but need to process. That his pauses aren't disinterest, but a way to digest the moment's intensity. That his contemplation isn't distance, but a deeper dive into shared experience. Authentic intimacy requires mutual vulnerability, but for the deep thinker, vulnerability has layers that can take time to be revealed. He doesn't just share events from his life, but meanings he attributes to them, interpretations he makes, connections he sees. It's as if he offered not just his story, but his complete inner world. Learning to dose this depth in relationships is a delicate art. It's not about hiding who you are, but revealing yourself at a pace that allows the other to accompany the journey. It's discovering that true love doesn't require you to diminish yourself, but may ask you to modulate intensity so that connection is sustainable. The ideal relationship for the deep thinker is one where he can be completely himself without fear of being too much, where his contemplative nature is seen as richness, not complication. Fragmentation is one of the most striking characteristics of the deep thinker's experience. His hyperactive mind, his intense emotions, his tendency toward bodily dissociation, his rich inner life but sometimes disconnected from external reality. All this creates an experience of himself as multiple parts that don't always communicate with each other. Carl Jung saw this fragmentation not as pathology, but as a human condition that needs to be recognized and worked toward integration. For the deep thinker, this reunification task is especially urgent and complex, since his parts are particularly differentiated and sometimes contradictory. There's the rational thinker who analyzes everything, the emotional feeler who absorbs intensely, the body that's often neglected, the inner child who carries old wounds, the social adult who adapts to expectations, the soul that seeks transcendence. All these parts exist simultaneously, but not always in harmony. The deep thinker's psychodynamics involves learning to recognize these different internal voices, understand their needs and functions, and create a more harmonious internal dialogue. It's not about eliminating complexity, but orchestrating it more consciously and integratively. Alfred Adler contributed to this understanding by showing how feelings of inferiority can lead to compensations that fragment personality even more. The deep thinker may develop a supervaluation of intellect as a way to compensate for feelings of social inadequacy, creating an imbalance that needs to be corrected. True integration happens when the person stops fighting against their different parts and begins to see them as complementary aspects of a complex totality. It's like collecting pieces of colored glass scattered on the floor and discovering that, together, they form a stained glass window. Each fragment maintains its unique color, but contributes to a larger and more beautiful image than any individual part could create alone. It's like conducting an orchestra instead of trying to make all instruments play the same note. This integration process has no defined end. It's a constant journey of self-knowledge, acceptance, and harmonization. For the deep thinker, it can represent the difference between living fragmented in constant internal conflict and living integrated in their natural complexity. There comes a moment in the deep thinker's journey when the very characteristic that seemed to be his curse reveals itself as his greatest strength. The excess sensitivity that made him suffer transforms into a unique capacity to understand human nuances. The intensity that isolated him becomes the power to create authentic connections. The depth that overloaded him becomes a source of wisdom and creativity. This transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires a conscious process of accepting and integrating all parts of oneself, including those that seemed problematic. It's like discovering that what you thought was weakness was, in reality, misunderstood and misdirected strength. Excessive thinking, when channeled consciously, becomes extraordinary capacity for analysis and understanding. Sharpened sensitivity, when adequately protected, allows perceptions and insights that escape others. The need for meaning, when honored, leads to a life rich in purpose and direction. But perhaps the most significant transformation is in how the deep thinker relates to himself. Self-compassion replaces self-criticism. Acceptance replaces resistance. Self-love replaces shame. Often, this change happens in a specific moment of insight. Like that morning when you look in the mirror and instead of criticizing the intensity you see in your own eyes, finally recognize they're a rare sensitivity that deserves to be honored. It's as if you finally made peace with your own nature. This internal reconciliation has transformative effects on external life. Relationships become more authentic when there's no longer a need to hide essential parts of yourself. Creativity flows more freely when there's no longer constant internal judgment. Decisions become clearer when all parts of personality are considered and honored. The integrated deep thinker discovers that his difference isn't an obstacle to genuine connection, but an invitation to richer and more meaningful relationships. His sensitivity becomes a bridge to mutual understanding instead of a barrier to social acceptance. This transformation journey doesn't eliminate the challenges of being a deep person in a world that values surface, but it offers internal resources to navigate these challenges with more grace, wisdom, and self-compassion. It's discovering that the labyrinth of one's own mind can become a garden when you learn to walk through it with love instead of fear. If you've made it this far, it's because you recognize something of yourself in these words. Maybe you felt relief discovering that you're not alone in your particular way of experiencing the world. Maybe you found names for experiences that always seemed indescribable. The deep thinker's journey isn't easy, but it's profoundly meaningful. Your sensitivity is a gift to a world that desperately needs more depth, more authenticity, more genuine connection. Your way of being may seem out of place now, but it's exactly what humanity needs to evolve toward more understanding and compassion. If these words found echo in you, maybe it's time to walk together on this journey of discovery and acceptance. If this reflection touched your soul, I invite you to explore even more deeply these themes in our exclusive ebook Alchemy and Archetypes, which can help you in this process. And if these words resonated in your heart, consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a like. This way you help other deep souls find this content and discover they're not alone in their journey.